The sea never sleeps. Even in silence it speaks. Waves roll like breath, in, out. Secrets stir beneath. Long ago, before time kept track, the ocean whispered of gods, and of one god in particular, Poseidon, ruler of tides and storm. His trident shaped the sea floor. His voice summoned rain. But even gods face mysteries too deep for power alone. This story begins not with thunder, but with a song. A melody, faint and strange, rising from the western edge of the world. It came with the tide. With the pull of a spiral no sailor could escape. The Eternal Whirlpool, a wound in the water that never healed. Legends warned of it, charts avoided it. None who entered returned. But one day Poseidon stood upon a coral cliff, staring westward. The sea was calm, but something beneath it trembled. Not anger, not chaos. Something older. A promise, perhaps, forgotten, unfulfilled. And Poseidon, the god of oceans, decided to listen. Not to conquer, not to command, but to remember. Because even the sea, mighty, ancient, endless, remembers what we forget. And so, the tide turned, and the journey began. Beneath the mirror of the sea, a kingdom shimmered in endless blues and greens. Coral towers rose like cathedrals, carved by time, guarded by schools of silver fish. Tides whispered through seashell arches. Light danced on the sea floor like fireflies in a dream. This was Aegeron, the heart of the ocean's realm, where Poseidon ruled not by fear, but by presence. He moved like current, steady and unseen, felt more than followed. His court was silent today. Even the dolphins swam slower. Above, the surface gleamed like glass. But the deep felt different, still. He stood at the edge of the grand tide hall, overlooking the shifting plains of sand. His trident rested beside him, not as a weapon, but a reminder. He was not just a god of waves. He was the memory of the sea. Everything the ocean had ever known, it flowed through him. And something ancient was stirring. The spiral. He first sensed it days ago, a pulse beyond the western currents. It had no form, no sound, but it pulled. The seaweed near the edge of the world now swayed in unnatural rhythms. The dolphins refused to swim that far west. Even the sharks, bold and wild, turned away. He sent messengers, stingrays with silver eyes. They did not return. He spoke to the whales. Their songs trembled when asked of the spiral. Only one word came back, whispered in bubbles, remember. But what was there to remember? In Aegeron, the people of the sea still sang. Pearl farmers harvested under moonlight. Marrow children played in the reef shadows. Yet even they had begun to ask about the change in the currents. Poseidon felt it in the tides, the weight of something unresolved. He drifted to the Temple of Tides, built inside the shell of an ancient leviathan. Water priests lit lamps of glowing kelp. They bowed, their eyes unsure. He asked nothing of them, just passed in silence, his gaze set westward. At the altar, the waters shimmered with images of the world. He waved his hand. The whirlpool appeared, a spiral of dark light, not spinning in rage, but in memory. It was not growing in size, but in depth, as if reaching backward into time. A gateway? A prison? A question? Poseidon whispered into the water, a command older than stars. The ocean did not answer. It listened, and that silence was louder than thunder. He returned to his private grotto, carved into the ribs of a sleeping sea serpent. Amphitrite waited for him there. Her hair flowed like ink in water. "You feel it too," he said. She nodded. "It's not coming. It's calling." He looked at the horizon, though no horizon could be seen from the depths. "Then it's time," he said softly. "Time to remember what even the sea forgot." She touched his hand, sea skin on sea skin. You won't go alone. But Poseidon shook his head. This began before even us. I must go first. She did not argue. She only whispered, "Then take the compass." He reached for the coral compass, pulsing softly with light. A gift from the ancient turtle Krenos. It pointed not to places, but to truths. Poseidon closed his eyes, and in that stillness, the god of oceans listened. Not for sounds, but for echoes, the kind that only come from something long buried, the kind that do not scream. They wait. And as he left the grotto, the sea seemed to lean in closer, as if curious, as if watching, as if remembering too. The sea has many voices. When it gathers to speak, even gods grow quiet. Poseidon called them, not with words, but with waves. A summons carried by tides, through coral veins and kelp forests. From every corner of the ocean, they came. Not mortals, not warriors, but the old ones. The keepers of flow and balance, the naiads of the inner rivers, the salt witches of the outer reefs, spirits of whirlpools, fogs, and deep trenches. And in the heart of it all, the grand tide hall breathed with energy. Columns of seashell and light pulsed like the beat of the world's heart. The council met beneath a dome of glass coral, open to the shifting sky above. 1,000 sea creatures hovered, silent observers in the current. Poseidon stood in the center, his eyes cast west. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "The spiral has awakened," he said. Murmurs stirred like distant storms. "The whirlpool?" whispered Alaris, the mist nymph of the southern banks. "The very one," Poseidon replied. "But it no longer spins in chaos. It listens," said Naimedes, keeper of the northern ice flow. "It waits." An elder manta glided forward. His eyes were blind but full of knowing. "It sings," he said, voice trembling, low and old. Poseidon nodded. "I've heard it too, not with ears, with memory." A sea sage from the sapphire deeps unrolled a current scroll. Blue ink swirled like living wind, forming ancient sigils. "This mark," she pointed, "is the sign of the bound echo." Gasps rippled through the water, a name not spoken in an age. "It means a vow was made," she continued, "and left unkept." Poseidon felt a chill ripple through his trident. A forgotten promise, lost in time, but not in water. The ocean remembers everything, even the things gods wish it didn't. Voices rose like tide swells. The spiral was sacred, cursed, divine, forbidden. The coral twins argued. One said, "Seal it forever." The other said, "Dive into its heart." A pearl-eyed crab oracle clicked his claws, offering riddles without answers. Poseidon raised his hand. The water stilled. "This is not a threat," he said slowly. "It is a message." "From whom?" asked Amphitrite, stepping into the light beside him. The question echoed. From the old gods? From a lost realm? From the ocean itself? No answer came. But in the silence, Poseidon spoke again. "I will go." A silence deeper than the trenches followed. "You are king," whispered Naimedes. "If you vanish, I won't vanish," he said. "I will return with truth." "Or memory," murmured the blind manta. "Sometimes they are the same." The council did not vote. The sea doesn't work that way. It moves by feel, and all could feel the pull of the spiral. As the council dissolved into currents and trails of light, Poseidon remained. He stared into the dome above, where moonlight filtered down. It shimmered like an eye, watching, waiting. "Prepare the chariot," he said at last. "The journey begins at dusk tide." And far away, though no one spoke it aloud, the spiral turned once more. Slower now, as if listening, as if aware, as if it too had been waiting for this moment to come. The sea has sounds no land ear can catch. Not thunder, not wave, but song. And sometimes, that song is not sung by anything living. Sometimes, it rises from the deep places, old, wordless, and waiting. Poseidon felt it first in his bones, long before he heard it, a low hum beneath the waves, pulsing like a heartbeat from the ocean floor. It was not constant. It came with the dusk tides. Every evening, just as the light dimmed, the spiral would begin to sing. The melody was slow, haunting, more breath than voice. It curved through currents like it remembered every path ever carved by water. At first, Poseidon thought it a trick, a vent's whisper or whale's echo. But the choral compass pulsed each time the sound returned. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from below. Not noise, not warning. A memory, one the sea had buried, one now pushing its way back up. The song called out not in fear, but in longing, as if something had waited too long in silence. One evening, Poseidon sat alone by the singing caves of Mythical. There, the walls captured sound, old, ancient, or new. He let the tide flow around him and waited. And then, like silk drawn through salt, the song came again. It was clearer here, more focused. He heard no words, yet meanings pressed against his mind. Regret? Promise? Return. The spiral was not a storm. It was a voice. One that had been ignored for too long. Poseidon closed his eyes, tried to listen deeper. The melody shifted, tones that curved like waves against cliffs. He remembered the old chants, songs sung when oceans were young, before kingdoms, before tridents, songs of unity, of bonds, of oaths. One note in particular returned again and again, a sound shaped like a question, a call for someone or something. It reminded Poseidon of a lullaby once sung to sea-born children, a tune meant to guide lost spirits home. Could it be the same, echoed across eons? He left the caves and summoned the whales, the blue giants who remembered the first reefs. They listened, then sang in reply. Their song wrapped around the spiral's melody like thread finding a needle. Harmony. Poseidon felt the vibration run through every shell and stone. Even the seagrass swayed in time. One of the elder whales surfaced and whispered through bubbles, "It is not alone." Poseidon asked, "What is singing?" The whale turned slowly. Not what, who. That answer chilled him more than cold currents ever could. A presence, conscious, waiting. And the spiral was not its prison. It was its echo. That night, as he drifted through the still waters, Poseidon listened again. The melody had changed, slightly. There was now a second voice beneath it, faint, hesitant, but growing. As if something had heard him listening and had begun to sing back. The spiral, once feared, now sounded like a choir of one longing to become two. Poseidon held the choral compass close. Its light glowed in rhythm with the song. He whispered into the current, "I hear you." And for the first time, the sea whispered back, "Then come." The song faded, but its memory clung to the water like mist. And far below, the spiral turned once more. Slower, softer, more alive than ever before. Long before Poseidon ruled the tides, others walked the sea in silence. They built with shells and sang to stones. Their temples now lie buried beneath centuries of sand and salt. Forgotten by the world, but not by the sea. And sometimes, when the current turns just right, the past surfaces. This is how Amphitrite found it, in a drift of light beneath the old hollow.
We must reach the shore.
A current opened a hidden door in a sunken ridge. Behind it, a chamber lost to time, a sanctuary untouched by even crabs. Inside, on a slab of fossilized coral, lay a single scroll. Not paper, not kelp, but a weaving of gold thread and crushed pearls. It shimmered with memory, not ink. She did not touch it. She listened first. Ancient objects often speak louder than mouths ever could. The scroll hummed, softly but with intent. She brought it to Poseidon, carried in a clam of black stone. He unrolled it with care, as one might open a sleeping dream. The map inside did not show coasts or islands. It showed layers, depth over distance, memory over miles. Each spiral marked not a place, but a moment. The center of the map pulsed faintly, the very spot where the whirlpool sang. Symbols danced around it, some familiar, others lost to age. Poseidon traced one with his finger. It glowed, then vanished. A test, a key, a warning. Amphitrite watched him with quiet eyes. "It's not just a location," she said. He nodded. "It's a seal." "A prison?" she asked. "Or a promise?" he answered. "Maybe both." The coral compass spun once, then locked to the center of the map. It pulsed in rhythm with the spiral's song. The connection was clear now. The whirlpool was more than nature. It was designed. Poseidon turned to the scroll's edges. Smaller runes whispered along the frame. Old language, older than Olympus. He whispered them aloud, syllables heavy like anchors. The sea shifted when he spoke. Currents stilled. Light dimmed. The ocean was listening. And in that stillness, a vision rose from the map. Not a picture, but a memory made of mist and sound. It showed an ancient city beneath the sea, lit by moonlight and glowing coral. In its center, a gathering of figures cloaked in salt and stars. One held the coral compass. Another sang the very song the spiral hums now. They stood around a whirlpool, smaller then, newborn. A voice from the vision whispered, "We bind not in fear, but in remembrance." Then darkness. The map rolled itself shut, the vision gone. Poseidon stood silent. "They didn't trap something," he said. "They protected it." "But from what?" Amphitrite asked. He didn't answer. He didn't know. Not yet. But the past had spoken, and the sea had remembered. He placed the scroll back into the black clam. "We sail at first moonrise," he said. And outside, the water stirred, as if nodding in agreement. The map no longer slept, and neither did the truth it carried. In the deepest corner of the sea, where sunlight had never touched, lived the ancient turtle Kronos. He was older than coral, older than storms, older even than Poseidon's memory. Few knew his exact home, only those the sea trusted were ever led there. Poseidon had not seen him in an age, but now, with the spiral singing and the past waking, the time had come. He followed the path of drifting firefish and spiraled currents, through caverns lit by glowing plankton, past the wrecks of long-lost ships. At last, in a trench wrapped in silence, he found Kronos resting on a stone. The turtle's shell held carvings older than language. Each line told a story, a vow, a piece of truth. Kronos opened one eye, slow, heavy, knowing. "You remember," the turtle said, not as a question, but as a statement. "I do," Poseidon replied. "The sea is stirring, and the spiral is calling." Kronos nodded. "Then you'll need this." From beneath his shell, he pulled a glowing object wrapped in sea moss. It pulsed like a heartbeat, soft and steady. The coral compass, not forged, not crafted, grown, made from living coral, starlight, and the breath of a dying god. It had no needle, no markings, only light that shifted depending on the truth of your question. "It doesn't point north," Kronos said. "It points inward." Poseidon took it carefully. It was warm, a warmth that came from memory, not fire. Ask it nothing you're not ready to understand, the turtle warned. Poseidon closed his fingers around it. The compass pulsed once, then again. Each pulse was a memory, flashes of things buried deep within him. A temple door, a face without name, a voice that once said, "You promised."
Face the wrath of the sea.
He opened his eyes. The trench around him seemed to hum in reply.
We will not.
"This will guide me to the spiral's truth?" he asked. "No," said Kronos. "It will guide you to your own." Poseidon stood silent. That answer felt heavier than the ocean itself. Kronos turned back to his rock, already drifting toward sleep. "You are not just a god," he said. "You are a key." Poseidon did not ask what that meant. He already knew. Deep down beneath layers of salt and silence. He rose through the waters, compass in hand. As he passed into lighter depths, the coral compass began to glow brighter. It beat in harmony with the spiral's distant hum. Above him, the surface shimmered like an unanswered question. The sea around him was changing,
Reach the shore.
currents shifting without wind, whispers growing louder.
The storm is too
He reached
strong.
the chariot waiting near the kelp line. The seahorses shimmered in golden silence, sensing his purpose. Amphitrite stood nearby, her gaze fixed on the compass. "It remembers you," she said softly. "It never forgot," Poseidon replied. He placed the compass near his heart. It pulsed again, not as a tool, but as a companion. Not to guide him away, but to lead him back. Back to the promise he once made. Back to the memory he tried to leave beneath the waves. And so, the god of oceans set his course. Not toward land, not toward conquest, but toward the spiral, and the truth waiting within. The sea grew darker as Poseidon journeyed west, not from lack of light, but from memory growing heavier with each mile. He rode his chariot of light shell and silver, pulled by seahorses born from storm foam. Above, the sky rippled with faint auroras. Below, silence deepened. No fish swam here. No current dared to wander. Even the plankton refused to glow. Only the coral compass pulsed steadily near his chest. Its rhythm no longer matched his heartbeat. It matched something deeper, older. The spiral was close now. From afar, it looked like a wound in the ocean. Slowly spinning, quietly alive. Not violent, not loud, just waiting. The edges shimmered with blue mist, neither water nor air. Poseidon stopped at its border. The water here did not move. It was held like breath before a word. He reached out, letting his hand pass through the mist. It felt warm, not with heat, but with recognition. The spiral knew him. The coral compass began to hum, a tone that filled the space between thoughts. Poseidon whispered, "I have come." The mist parted, not pushed, but welcomed. The chariot dissolved into bubbles. The seahorses vanished into foam. He floated forward, alone. The spiral surrounded him now. It was not a tunnel, not a hole. It was space folded inward, current wrapped around memory. Images passed him like drifting shells. A city built from light, a face he once knew. A war not fought, but feared. None were clear. All were echoes. Then, the song returned. Not as music, but as a presence. It didn't speak in words, but in feeling. It asked no questions. It offered no answers. Only one thing pulsed through every ripple. Remember. Poseidon opened his mind, and suddenly, he fell. Not through water, through time. He saw himself, younger, unburdened, walking beside others he could no longer name. They stood around the newborn spiral, hands joined, eyes closed. They were not binding a monster. They were guarding a truth. An agreement made in silence, sealed with sacrifice. One would remember, the others would forget. Poseidon was the one, the keeper of the memory. But time, even for gods, can dull the mind. He had forgotten, and the spiral had waited for him to return, to fulfill the oath. The vision faded. He was back inside the spiral's heart, floating, still, seen. The coral compass flared, not bright, but deep, as if opening a door inside him. Poseidon spoke, not with lips, but with essence. I remember. And the spiral answered, not with noise, but release. The mist turned to light. Currents returned. The silence cracked, not broken, but freed. A warmth spread through the ocean. Every reef, every trench, every river mouth felt it. The god of oceans had remembered. And the sea sang again, not a warning, not a cry, a welcome. The spiral turned once more, no longer alone, no longer waiting. And Poseidon, no longer just king, drifted upward, not in escape, but in return, toward the world that forgot, carrying the truth it lost. The moment Poseidon emerged from the spiral, the sea changed. It was not a storm, not a quake, but something deeper, more ancient. The waters remembered. Currents that once wandered aimlessly now moved with purpose. Reefs pulsed with color unseen in centuries. Whales sang old songs, their notes filled with reverence. And all across the oceans, the silence lifted. In the city of Kerulea, dolphins leapt in strange patterns, as if dancing to unseen drums. At the edge of the abyssal rift, the watcher eels uncoiled, a sign not seen since the first age. The ocean's voice had returned, and those who could hear it listened. Poseidon drifted to the surface, slower than breath, lighter than foam. Above him, the moon cast a path of silver across the waves. Amphitrite waited, standing on the water like it was glass. Her eyes widened when she saw him, not with fear, but with knowing. "You remember?" she whispered. "I do," he said. "And the spiral has released its truth." She stepped closer. The water rose to meet her feet. "What did we forget?" she asked. "That the sea was once a promise," Poseidon replied. "A bond made in unity, not control." "And the spiral?" "It was the keeper of that bond, a memory we chose to guard, then chose to forget." Lightning flashed far away, not from anger, but awakening. The coral compass floated beside Poseidon, its glow steady, no longer pulsing. It had served its purpose.
The storm is too
All across the oceans, water spirits began to stir. The naiads emerged from their rivers. Salt witches returned to the reefs they once abandoned. Even the silent spirits of the deep rose from trenches long sealed. They came not to question, not to fight, but to remember. Poseidon raised his hands, and the waters formed a circle around him. A great ring, wide as a continent, shallow as breath. Within it, echoes from the past spoke. Not in words, in tides, in warmth, in patterns of coral light. The sea does not speak like mortals. It remembers through movement. The ocean was offering its memory to all who would receive it. In the sky, clouds drifted into spiral shapes. In forests, animals grew still near rivers, sensing change. Even the rain that fell upon distant lands carried a hush. The whole world felt the shift. Amphitrite placed her hand on Poseidon's. "We are not just rulers of the sea," she said. "We are its voice. And its memory," Poseidon added. Together, they lowered their hands into the circle of water. The sea responded, rising in waves that shimmered like song. The spiral had passed its story to them. Now it was time to pass it on, to teach the world what had been forgotten, to remind both gods and mortals that the ocean is not a thing to command. It is a promise to keep. And in that moment, Poseidon felt something he hadn't felt in ages. Peace. Not the silence of still waters, but the harmony of remembered truth. The coral compass dimmed, folding into a pearl, a final gift from the sea. Poseidon held it close, and the sea, all of it, whispered one word: begin. The day after Poseidon's return, the oceans no longer sounded the same. There was a stillness that spoke, a quiet that listened, not silence, but presence, as if every drop of water waited for what would come next. Far from Olympus, on the cliffs of Thalos, a boy watched the sea without blinking. His name was Neron, fisherman's son. No lineage, no power. But the ocean had chosen to whisper to him, and he listened. It began when he touched a tide pool that glowed even at night. The water rippled beneath his fingers, not away, but toward. He felt not wetness, but warmth, and a thought that was not his. You are seen. The boy told no one. Some things don't need to be believed to be true. That night, he returned to the same pool. It was deeper than before, and it sang, not with voice, but with vibration, a rhythm like a heartbeat inside a shell. Neron leaned closer, and the tide rose to meet him. It didn't drown, it didn't push. It wrapped around him like a coat of memory, and in a moment that passed like a blink in a lifetime, he saw a god, Poseidon, but not as statues showed him, not towering, not thundering, calm, knowing, kind. He looked at the boy, and then at the sea beside him, and said just one word: remember. Then the vision faded. But Neron did remember. He woke with sand in his hands and the compass's song in his chest. Not the coral compass itself, but its echo. Because now, the memory it carried was no longer sealed in a god. It was rippling outward, to spirits, to waters, to children like Neron. The sea had opened its story to the world, and the world was listening. In far-off deserts, rivers flowed backward for a day. On icy cliffs, seals howled melodies never heard by humans. The world was echoing the spiral, not in chaos, in communion. Poseidon stood on the edge of a reef, watching. He did not need a throne. The sea itself was his seat, his voice, his witness. Beside him, Amphitrite traced her fingers through the rising mist. It's beginning, she said. He nodded. Not a rain, a remembering. In the heart of the ocean, where the spiral once turned alone, new life bloomed. Coral like no other, glowing softly, humming gently. It grew in a perfect circle, a ring of memory. The spiral was no longer just a force. It was now a place, a living monument to a promise kept. Fish returned to waters once abandoned. Whales brought their calves through currents newly warm. And all the while, the tides moved with a new rhythm. Not faster, not slower, but deeper. Each wave carried a song. Each shore received it. And somewhere, in a small house on the cliffs of Thalos, a boy wrote that song down, line by line, not for praise, not for history, but because he was asked to remember. And in every tide the sea whispered back, we remember too. Far beneath the surface, in the valley of shells, something ancient stirred. The shells there were not just remnants. They were vessels of memory. Each spiral held a whisper, a truth, a story once told by waves and wind. Long ago, the shells were used by the sea to teach those willing to listen. But the world had grown loud, and the shells had fallen silent, until now. The return of the spiral's memory reawakened them. Their songs returned, soft at first, like breath on glass, then stronger, like the tide pulling at the shore. Poseidon stood in the center of the valley, bare feet brushing sand older than Olympus. Around him, shells trembled, not in fear, but in joy. They recognized the voice that had once silenced them. And now they welcomed it back. He picked up one, small and cracked, shaped like a crescent moon. He held it to his ear and heard a lullaby, a song his mother sang when he was no older than the waves that kiss the sand, a memory he hadn't touched in eons. Amphitrite joined him, lifting a blue shell shaped like a flame. She listened, her eyes softened. "They remember everything," she whispered. "Even what we try to forget," he said. Together, they walked the valley as the shells began to hum in harmony. Not in chaos, in communion. Each note held a lesson, a warning, a gift. The ocean was teaching again. And for the first time in a long time, the gods were listening. Further inland, rivers whispered the same melodies. Lakes shimmered with dreams long buried. Children who touched water began to dream of coral cities and glowing spirals. The sea was no longer confined to its borders. It was memory in motion, wisdom carried in every droplet. The shells began to organize themselves, forming patterns across the sand. Spirals, circles, waves, symbols of connection. Poseidon traced one with his finger. It pulsed beneath his touch. A voice, not loud but deep, echoed inside his chest. "You are not just a keeper. You are a bridge." He stood still. Bridge between what? Past and present, gods and mortals, silence and song. He understood now. The spiral did not return to be worshipped. It returned to be remembered. And through that memory, healed. In the Valley of Shells, the sea spoke not with commands, but invitations. To feel, to listen, to remember. Poseidon and Amphitrite stood hand in hand. No trident, no throne, just truth. And the shells sang on, low, constant, eternal. Their music reached the farthest trenches and the highest clouds. Not to dominate, to connect. A fisherman in the north heard it in the quiet between waves. A priestess in the jungle heard it in a bowl of sacred water. Even the wind began to carry hints of the sea's story. The world was no longer divided. Water was no longer background. It was a voice, and it was singing. One child, one whisper, one shell at a time. In the deep waters off the coast of Lysara, the ocean shimmered with threads of silver light. This was the place where the first pact was made. Long before cities, kings, or temples. Few remembered it. Fewer still knew it was real. But the sea remembered. And now it was ready to speak again. Poseidon swam alone to the heart of the ancient trench, not with speed, with reverence. The water grew still as he approached. No current dared disturb this sacred space. The coral compass, now a pearl, pulsed faintly in his hand. It guided him through a maze of coral gates and crystal towers. Structures not built, but grown, shaped by harmony, not force. At the center of it all stood the Table of Tides, a stone ring etched with symbols older than language. Each mark told a story, a vow, a memory. Poseidon placed the pearl in the center of the table. Light spread outward, activating the ancient pact. From every corner of the sea, emissaries began to arrive. Not gods, not rulers, listeners, spirits, elders, the firstborn of rivers and reefs. Each took a place around the Table of Tides. They said nothing. But their presence spoke volumes. The sea had gathered to decide its future. Poseidon stood not as king, but as one of them. He raised his hand. The light dimmed. The silence deepened. Then he spoke. This is not a command, not a decree. It is a remembering and an invitation. We once made a promise, between land and sea, between the old and the new. We broke it. The waters shivered, not in anger, but in truth. But memory has returned, he continued, and with it, responsibility. The spiral was never just a force. It was a bond. It called us back to this table, not to reclaim power, but to restore balance. A ripple of agreement passed through the circle. The river spirit of Thai bowed her head. The kelp singer of the Sarin coast sang one low note. Even the whale harbinger of the ice sound turned its great eye toward Poseidon. The decision was made. The pact would be renewed. But this time, it would not be sealed with silence. It would be shared with the world. Poseidon placed both hands on the table. The pearl cracked open, releasing the final memory of the spiral. A wave of light spread through the sea, not blinding, but clear. It reached every coastline, every cave, every tide pool. Those who touched water that day felt it. Not knowledge, understanding, not command, connection. The pact beneath the waves was no longer a secret. It was a gift. Children heard it in the way the tide tugged at their toes. Sailors heard it in the pause between waves. Even dry lands felt it in the rhythm of falling rain. Poseidon stepped back from the table. He did not smile. He did not weep. He simply listened. And the sea, at last, spoke back. One word. Together. Time passed. Not in days or years, but in tides, in stories, in silence softened by song. The world had not changed overnight, but something beneath it had shifted. Children played in rivers that now hummed with gentle warmth. Fishermen cast their nets with a whisper of thanks, not command. And the sea, always vast, always wild, felt closer, as if it no longer looked through us, but into us. Poseidon did not return to Olympus. He stayed near the spiral, which now pulsed like a second heart beneath the ocean. He no longer carried the trident, not because he was weak, but because he no longer needed to rule. He guided with presence, not power. Amphitrite walked beside him, her eyes soft with memory. Together, they became something more than gods. They became keepers of balance, and the sea followed their rhythm, sometimes storm, sometimes stillness, but always listening. The coral compass, now a simple pearl, rested in the heart of the spiral. Visitors came, not many, and never the same way twice. They came not to conquer, not to take. They came to listen. The spiral showed each visitor something different. A lost memory, a forgotten song, a feeling they could never name before. But always, it left them changed, because remembering changes you. Even the land began to remember. Winds carried sea songs into the mountains. Trees bent toward rivers that once flowed away from them. The world was not being rewritten. It was being recalled, as if every rock, every grain of sand had always held the truth. We simply forgot to ask. In the village of Thalos, the boy Neron grew older. But he never stopped listening. He kept writing, page after page, shell after shell, not as a prophet, not as a hero, just as a witness. His words were carried to other shores. Some dismissed them, some wept over them, a few remembered. And that was enough. Because the sea had never needed everyone, just someone to listen, to remember, to share. And the ocean, in return, remembered them too. Poseidon stood once more at the edge of the spiral. The waters shimmered, neither deep nor shallow, just timeless. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in 1,000 years, he smiled. Not because the journey was over, but because it would continue, in tides, in voices, in the hush between waves. And if you ever stand near the sea, alone and quiet, listen closely. You might hear a song, or feel a memory that's not quite yours. You might remember something you never lived. And if you do, don't be afraid. That's the ocean, speaking through time, not to command, not to warn, but to welcome you back, because you are part of the story too. And the sea, the great, breathing memory of the world, never forgets.